A whole new world. The final wish. She watched it all, torn between laughing and crying. Jafar walked over to the balcony, raised his hands above his head. His magically enhanced voice rang out over the kingdom. People of Agrabah, lay down your weapons. The Princess Jasmine and I have come to an agreement. We are to be wed this very moment. Cease your fighting and come to the palace to bear witness. A guard came rushing to the room, pushing a confused-looking old man in religious robes in front of him. I'm sorry, my lord. We couldn't find Crossgo. This one will have to do. Jasmine took a deep breath and began to walk forward. Stop, Undead Razul said. Proceed no further. Razul, Aladdin said, swallowing hard. I'm sorry about what happened to you. I never intended... I never meant for you to be killed. The ghoul looked at him impassively. Neither forgiveness nor anger showed in his body's bloody glowing eyes. Razul, please, Aladdin begged softly. You swore to protect Agrabah, against thieves like me, against harm to the people. Your army is now attacking children and forcing families to turn each other over to Jafar. He makes people line up and get branded and turns them into ghouls like you. Is this what you want to protect? Still, Razul said nothing. Look outside, Razul, Aladdin pleaded, pointing out the window. Look, Agrabah is burning. Your city is burning. Razul turned his head to look, moving nothing else. Faint orange light flicked over his deadly white skin. Some of the glow was from the rising sun, Aladdin realized with horror. They did not obey, Razul said slowly. Obey what? Obey who? Razul, don't you remember anything from your life? You swore to serve a sultan who, while he might not have been the best ruler, never launched an attack against his own people. Jafar is killing and torturing everyone who disagrees with him, and if he can't win, he'll destroy Agrabah so no one else can have it. Don't you see that? Razul remained silent, watching. Please, Aladdin whispered, glancing at the horizon out of the window again. I know I'm the last person in the world to ask you for anything. I am truly, truly sorry for what happened to you, for what I did to you, but you know me. Think back on all those years you have known me, Razul. I may be a thief, but I'm not evil, and I'm not lying to you now. I saw a 9-year-old boy, undead like you. Do you want your fate to be shared by children? Razul turned his head back slowly to look at Aladdin, but there were no pupils to focus on, nothing beyond the red, dead glow. Aladdin began to despair. Then Razul's scimitar clattered to the floor. End this, street rat. His voice was just as dead and hollow as it was before. There was no indication of what thought process had gone on in his monstrous head. Thank you, Aladdin whispered in relief. I hope you find peace. But Razul didn't respond or move to get out of the way. Juban and Aladdin slunk behind him and out the door. The ghoul continued to stare into nothing in the middle of the pitch-black hall. And Royal Princess Jasmine, the daughter of the Sultan, and the old religious man trailed off confused. I'm sorry, daughter. I don't remember all your names. Rose of Agrabah, twice great-granddaughter of Elisheba the Wise. I think it was Elisheba, Jasmine said thoughtfully. She kept an eye on one of the days behind them, on the throne room, an eye on the costly gold drapes that hung around the outside of the throne and fell from the ceiling. Hey, she suddenly said to the sorcerer, what's your full name? Jafar blinked. What? Your full name, Jasmine said patiently. For as long as I can remember, everyone just always called you by your title, Grand Vizier or Jafar. What's the rest of it? That is my only name, Jafar snapped. The only thing my parents gave me, and the only name you should ever be concerned about. In public you shall address me as my lord. Now continue, old man, before I set your lungs on fire. Jasmine's eyes appeared to graze over again as the poor religious man began to invoke the laws of Agrabah, etc., etc. And then the drapes behind the throne shivered. Relief flooded Jasmine's body like a cold plunge in the bath after a hot day. She tried not to let it show. Aladdin popped his head out and took a quick look around. When he saw her, he winked. He nodded her head as slightly as she could at the table to the left of the throne, where the lamp and the book sat. Aladdin gave her a smile and a thumbs up. Then he dropped to the ground. Is something wrong? Jafar asked, frowning at her. Just tearing up on my wedding day, Jasmine said sarcastically. Or it's ash from the fires you've been setting all over the city." "They started it," Jafar shot back. "Hurry up. Get to the part where she says I will." Aladdin was scuttling over to the table as silently as he could. One of the ministers looked up, eye drawn away from whatever terrible list he was going over. Jasmine sucked in her breath. Whether he never actually saw Aladdin, or saw him and choose not to say anything, she would never be sure. He did turn to look at her for a moment, and then went back to his work, as if nothing had interrupted him. Jasmine let out a breath. Aladdin slowly reached for the lamp. "Under the indulgence of the royal sultan, most high and exalted he be, I give you to each other now." Suddenly a high-pitched shriek filled the air, like the noise from an angry falcon, but much, much louder. Strange beaked creatures grew from the shadows on the walls. They screamed and flapped their wings in Aladdin's face. Jasmine did the only thing she could think of. She leapt forward to kiss Jafar. Jafar struggled away from her, turning his head and making little pft, pft noises. Then he finally managed to throw her off. He spun her around to look, then laughed maniacally at what he saw. Jasmine despaired. Inches from the lamp, Aladdin's hands were caught up in what looked like golden vines that grew out of the painting on the table itself. The more he struggled, the more they tightened. The shadow gargoyles faded, their work of warning done. "Oh, nicely played," Jafar said with the benevolence of someone who had just won. He strode forward toward Aladdin, his cape flaring out menacingly behind him. "I shall have expected something like this. Oh, wait, I did. Thus the gargoyle alarms and the vines." "Jafar," Jasmine said, unsure what she could accomplish. "It was very clever, my dear, saying it was all for peace. If you had pretended to actually have fallen in love with me, I wouldn't have believed it for a second." The calmness of his voice didn't fool anyone. Those ministers and servants who weren't actively running out of the room were very casually and quickly finding reasons to gather their stuff and leave. "Aladdin," Jafar said, tapping his cobra-headed staff on the floor, "you're an exceptionally talented and relentless young man. I admire that, I really do. You remind me of myself in some ways. So I'll make you a deal. You join me, Jasmine marries me, you convince the street rats to give up and give in. We all live happily ever after in my new world, Agrabah Ascendant." "Never," Aladdin hissed, pulling out his golden tendrils behind his wrist. "I can bring back the dead now, boy," Jafar drawled. "Really? Bring them back. I can bring back anyone who has ever died, even long ago. Even your mother." Aladdin stopped struggling. How did Jafar even know about his mother? "She would just be another one of your ghouls," Aladdin said uncertainly. No, my dear boy," Jafar said, leering. "My understanding of Al-Azif has only deepened. All levels of life and death are being unlocked for me now. She could be returned in perfect health with a whole body and mind." Before he could stop himself, Aladdin began to think of what Jafar had said. His mother. She could come back, healed of her disease, and he could give her the life she deserved. He could treat her like a queen, give her a hug, a house, all the food and fine things she'd always wanted to give him. He saw Jasmine bite her lip anxiously. But she needn't have worried. Those thoughts spun and died only a minute after he conceived them. Even if Jafar was telling the truth about his powers, Aladdin had seen Razul. He'd seen the little boy, who knew what his mother would really be like. Even if she did come back alive and whole, he knew what she would have to say about it. Making an alliance with an evil sorcerer only guaranteed more deaths and more happiness. "Not even for my mother," Aladdin whispered. "I will never ally with you." "Oh well, it doesn't really matter," Jafar said with an unsurprised shrug. "Once I crack the third law of magic, all of Agrabah would love me. Jasmine will love me. And you? Well, no, I won't force you to love me as well. Shall leave you as the only sane man left in Agrabah, while everyone else around you worships me. You will be completely alone." "That's where you're wrong, Jafar," Aladdin said with a grin. "No street rat is ever alone." Before Jafar could raise his eyebrows in a suitably nasty sneer, a scimitar flashed down out of the air, slicing the golden tendrils off of Aladdin's wrist. Juban came out from behind the throne. A moment later, a tattered flying mess of hair and pants came dashing into the room. Morgiana was only bleeding a little and carried a short sword in each hand, plus an extra scimitar on her right. Took you long enough, Aladdin said accusingly. You said no killing, she said, shrugging. Stuff like that takes time. She turned and tossed the scimitar to Jasmine. Jasmine caught it with a grin. Jafar snarled. He snatched the lamp off the table and thrust it into his robes. Then he lifted his staff. I feel I should warn you, the genie said weakly. The camel dung is about to hit the fan. But the street rats weren't waiting around. Aladdin leapt up to the magic table and aimed a roundhouse kick at the sorcerer's head. Duban made for Al-Azif, reaching for it with his 2 daggers held like tweezers. Morgiana ran over to the deadly hourglass and began to slam it with the butt of her sword. Jafar swung his staff sideways and blocked Aladdin's blow. Innocent whelps, he roared, eyes turning red. How you dare defy the most powerful sorcerer in the world? He raised his hand. A wall of fire sprang up behind Duban and Al-Azif. Elsewhere, furniture began to lift up in the air and fly across the room. Couches scraped along the floor. Vases spun out of control. An ottoman aimed itself at Aladdin's head. Aladdin leapt down from the table, doing a flip and hitting the ottoman aside with his feet as he tumbled. Duban dove for the floor, avoiding a brass and gold hookah that was meant to connect with his face. Morgiana and Jasmine had leapt around the smaller pieces of furniture meant for them. Aladdin swept his foot around, spinning like a dervish. He connected with Jafar's ankles. The sorcerer started to topple to the ground, then stopped midway. With a nasty laugh, Jafar rose back upright in a thoroughly unnatural fashion. He threw open his cape, revealing the robes he wore beneath. Aladdin saw to his horror that cinching them to the middle was the last piece of the carpet, the end with the tassels that he had always thought of as the poor thing's face. While Aladdin was transfixed, Jasmine took her scimitar and ran at Jafar, trying to bury it in Jafar's side. He easily turned the blow aside with the staff. Jasmine! Aladdin cried. What are you doing? Distracting him, she said, ducking as the sorcerer tried to clock her in the head, too angry to remember to use his powers for a moment. That was my job, remember? Yes, and you did a great job. Now get out of here before you get killed. With obvious difficulty, Jafar mastered his rage and calmed himself. His eyes glowed red again. Things around the room now began to explode with flame. Things that normally shouldn't be flammable. Stone vases and metal bric-a-brac. The throne itself exploded, throwing Duban to the floor. Shrapnel and debris went flying toward the back of Jasmine's head, streaked with fire and smoking as they went. Jasmine! Aladdin cried. The princess spun around, but not quite fast enough to avoid the flaming missile entirely. She screamed as it connected, covering her head with her arms. The air filled with the smell of burnt hair and flesh. Angry red skin bubbled up and pulled apart in a fleshy split across her forehead. Another vase lifted up and aimed at her. Morgiana immediately abandoned her attack on the hourglass and threw herself in front of Jasmine. Shireen and Ahmad howled silently as Morgiana seemed to abandon them, in the spiderweb of cracks in the glass she had managed to start. But Maruf merely looked resigned, understanding what they needed to do. It was too painful to watch. Using both of her swords, Morgiana swirled into a blur of moment, battling aside one flaming object after another. As the sorcerer focused on all of his rage on the princess, the faster the projectiles came, the faster she moved.